is in love with herself. Grey Wolf Studios.
What's up, guys? It's me, Grey Wolf, back here to do another video for you. And the video this time is actually going to be a video series. It's going to be a multi-part video. I don't know how many parts at this point, um, but probably I'm sure it's going to be several. Um, this first video is just going to be a real basic entry, um, some real basic entry level questions. Um, One of the most common questions I see thrown around out there is, it's the whole electric versus nitro thing. Which one's better? Well, I'm going to start with that one because that's probably one of the most common questions I see. If you are new to RCs, or if you haven't bought an RC yet, you're thinking about buying an RC or whatever, and you're not sure which route to go, nitro or electric, let me just give you a quick rundown on kind of the differences between the two, at least the main points, so you can kind of try to decide for yourself which one would better suit you. Basically, electrics are easier. They're they're essentially plug and play. You plug the stuff in, you set a few settings, you charge your batteries, you plug them in, boom, you're gone. Nitro, there's a lot more tinkering involved. You have to learn how to tune a nitro engine, which can be very frustrating for a new user, um, or a new hobbyist, whatever you want to call yourself. Um, Nitro has more realism in it, obviously, because you actually do have an internal combustion engine going, and with you know nitro smoke and the whole 9 yards. So if you're into realism, you don't mind a challenge. You don't mind the tinkering. If you're a person that really loves to tinker, um, and you don't mind the extra maintenance because they are a little more messy, then nitro is probably the route that you want to go. If you don't have a lot of time for the hobby, or you don't want to spend a lot of time working on your stuff, if you're not a tinkerer and you just want something to go out and bash with once in a while, then electric is probably for you. Uh, if you want just crazy, insane amounts of instant torque and or high speeds, you're pretty much going to have to go with an electric. Um, Myself, I like both. I Part of me is a tinker, and I love tinkering around with my nitros, and tuning the engines is still a little bit of a challenge for me. I've got it down fairly decent to this point, but it's an art form to be sure. There's still occasions where something weird will go on with my tune, and it'll take me a little while to figure it out. But I like that aspect of it. It doesn't bother me to have to tinker with it to get it to run properly. But I also sometimes I like the ease of the electric. Sometimes I don't feel like dealing with the extra hassle, the extra mess. Sometimes I might not have as much time on a given day or whatever. One of my kits is a high-speed rustler. Of course, I had to do that in electric because electrics. It's possible to achieve higher speeds with electrics than it is with nitros. Nitros are more challenging, though, which is another reason why I like nitro. So I like them both. There's pros and cons to each. Nitro has a little bit lower startup cost, but it has a continuing cost in glow plugs and fuel, whereas electrics don't, as long as you don't, as long as you don't damage your LiPo battery, then theoretically it should last you for a very long time. So that's just kind of a little, which one is better, nitro or electric? That just depends on you. Um, could go either way. So there's a little bit to think about in that area. But it really just boils down to personal preference. Um, Buying new versus buying used kits. This is another huge thing that I always see going on, or see people asking questions relating to this. If you are new to the hobby, I cannot stress to you how important it is to buy a new kit for your first kit. Do not buy a used kit for your first kit. Um, are there some good deals out there on used kits? Yeah, there are a few. You do run across an occasional really good deal out there. Most of the time, what you're going to run into is you're gonna run into inheriting other people's problems that they can't figure out for themselves. Um, Point in case, my very first RC was an LST2, the Losi LST2, which is a monster truck. They now have a newer version of it out called a double XL. But back when I first got into the hobby, I bought a used LST2 off of eBay for 225 bucks, which at the time I thought was a great deal. I was just like, I was so stoked because, you know, I saw how expensive they were to buy new, and I just couldn't believe that I got one for $225. Because I originally they were like, they're ready to run as like $700 kit. In fact, I think they still are close to it. I think they've dropped a little bit. I think they're more like 670 now, but they're still basically almost a $700 kit. Uh, so when I got the thing, turns out, well, I will tell you, I got lucky for my first one because, as it turns out, there was not the money that it took me to actually fix it up and get it into good running shape was actually, you know, on top of what I paid for the kit, was still actually considerably less than it was about half the price of a new kit. However, that being said, the drawbacks, and now bear in mind that I actually got a pretty decent used kit. Um, I've bought quite a few used kits over the course of my RC stint, if you will. And pretty much I've gotten one awesome deal that was just like, oh my God, I can't believe I got it that cheap. And there was like absolutely nothing wrong with it. And then I've got one decent deal, which was the LST2. There were some things wrong with it, but in the long run, once I figured out what they were and fixed them, I still came out ahead. The other probably 5 kits that I bought were junk. Um, there was so much stuff wrong with them. By the time that I got them fixed up, I was either lucky to get my money back out of them, or in some cases, I didn't get my money back out of them. I took a loss. One of the kits, I pretty much turned around every one of those kits. All the 4 out of the 5 bad ones, I turned around. I fixed them up, sold them back, and either broke even or lost a little bit on them. But I just wanted to get out from underneath them because they were bad deals. They were bad kits. It's just tons of stuff wrong with them. And some of them were discontinued, and I didn't even know it because I just started in, at that point when I was buying used kits. Um, a couple of them were discontinued, and I didn't even realize it. And when I went looking for parts, it was like, oh my God. So, lost my train of thought here. So yeah, buying versus buying used. Okay, so getting back to my story, about the LST2 that I got. When I first got it, now granted, it ended up being a decent deal, but when I first got it, I had so much trouble with it that I literally almost just chucked it into the gravel quarry where I one of the places where I go bash. I almost just chucked it over the edge into the quarry and just said to hell with it and left it. I mean, I literally came this close to doing that because it just every time I went out, something was wrong. It wasn't running right, and I could not figure out why because I didn't know what I was doing. I was too new in the hobby. I hadn't, every problem that came up was a new problem to me. I didn't know what I was doing. So, for your sanity's sake alone, it's not a good idea to buy a used kit. Um, Even still to this day, once you kind of know, once you've been in the hobby for a while and the average problems, and you start learning the average problems that each of the various kits out there have and things like that, you can start to kind of um, you can start to kind of wander into the realm of buying used. I will only buy at this point, and I'm no expert. Granted, maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, I might buy more used kits because I might be able to recognize more things right off the bat. But I'm still no expert, so one of the things that I look for in buying a used kit is the bottom of the chassis. If the bottom of the chassis has more than a handful of scrapes on it, I won't touch it. If the bottom of the chassis looks like hammered shit, then that kit has been put through hell. If it's just got all kinds of, basically the more chewed up the bottom of the chassis is, the more wear and tear has been put on that kit. Um, so yeah, I look for clean. I look for a clean chassis. Um, I usually look for rollers. I don't like buying used electronics. It's too hard to know, what they've been put through. Has the guy been, running his brushless motor at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, on a regular basis? Has his has he had that art? Has he had that ESC for 2 years or 2 weeks? Who knows? Who knows what? You can't really judge that kind of stuff until after you get it and you've used it. So I generally try to buy rollers. Generally try to buy ones that have obvious signs of low usage, low hours, things like that. Now, if I can find them that meet certain criteria like that, then I'll consider it. Or if I know the person that's owned it. If I know the person that's owned it is very meticulous in the way they take care of their rigs, then I would consider buying something like that from somebody. Um, a lot of you guys out there probably know who Squirrel is. Squirrel does a lot of. He's got his own YouTube channel where he does a lot of stuff like this. Um, Squirrel buys tons of kits, most of which he does not end up keeping. He sells a lot of them on eBay and whatnot. And you know, Squirrel, is a guy that he takes care of his kits. He knows how to maintenance them. He knows not only how to do it, but he does it. So if Squirrel was to put up an RC for sale on eBay, I would buy it if it was a good deal. Um, Joe Blow, that I have no idea, probably not. But anyway, you can buy. The bottom line comes down to this: you can buy used kits, but I strongly, strongly, strongly suggest that you wait until after you have some experience the uh, in the hobby to do that. And I'm talking a year or two minimum. Um, depending, maybe even more, depending on how hardcore you get into the hobby and how much you learn about other kits and whatnot. So anyway, for your first one especially, buy new. You won't regret it. And then as things break, you'll have more of an idea of what's broken. You'll have a better idea of what's broken and stuff. Okay, and so to finish off the LST2 story, I keep getting sidetracked. So the bottom line was there was a bunch of stuff wrong with it. The clutch shoes were shot right off the bat. That was one of the very first things that went wrong with it. I ended up having to put new clutch shoes in it. And then I kept burning up clutch shoes. I went through 3 pairs of aluminum clutch shoes and a pair of composite clutch shoes in a matter of less than a month. And then at one point, I started stripping out spur gears. I had no idea why. I mean, I was stripping out spur gears after running 5-10 minutes. And it wasn't because I didn't have my mesh set right. It actually, what it ended up being, there was a bunch of small things that I was having headaches with. And once I had owned the kit for a few months and I started stripping out the spur gears, like literally after 5 minutes of running, they would just seem to strip for no reason. I finally figured out what was going on, and what was going on was I took apart the transmission, and inside that transmission there were, I want to say, something like 17 or 19 bearings, 4 of which were bad. 2 of them were completely seized up, and the other 2 weren't seized, but they didn't spin freely. So basically what was happening was there was so much drag in the transmission that it was causing a lot of extra friction on the clutch shoes, which was heating up the clutch bell, which was in turn essentially melting the spur gears. And it took me forever to figure out what was going on, especially since it was the transmission, because being new to RCs, I was intimidated by the transmission. I was completely confident taking everything apart after owning the kit for a few months, except for the transmission. The transmission was the one thing that I was still afraid to crack open. But after I had basically checked everything else, I had to crack it open because that was the only thing left. And sure enough, that's when I discovered what the problem was. Once I had rebuilt the transmission, all those problems went away. But so I said all that to say this: if I would have just saved up my money for a while and actually bought a kit new, I wouldn't have went through the months and months of frustration and headaches and the temptation to quit and everything else that I went through in the beginning. So I hope that convinces you guys to be patient. I know it's hard. I still have problems being patient and saving up for what I really want myself. But yeah, do yourself a favor, buy new, especially until you get comfortable and until you get used to RCs. Then you can possibly start looking at used kits.